Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. There are about a dozen plant species that only live in a special kind of habitat called a cedar glade. And that habitat mostly just exists in 2 Middle Tennessee counties. There are also several varieties of orchid native to our state. In other words, the ecosystems here can be pretty amazing when nature is able to work the way it should. But those native species can't always compete with invasive species. If you've ever seen a field choked with kudzu, you know what I'm talking about. There's also development. So today, talking about native plants, why they matter, and how to preserve them here in Middle Tennessee. But first, it's still hard to know how worried we should be about monkeypox, although the World Health Organization did declare it an international public health emergency over the weekend. Scientists have been concerned about the possibility of an epidemic for years. Now it's spreading around the globe, and it has reached us here in Davidson County. At last count, the number of cases here was still in the single digits. WPLN senior healthcare reporter Blake Farmer has been following this story, and he joins us now. How's it going, Blake? Thanks for being here.
You're welcome, and let me just say at the outset that I'm not here to scare anyone.
Okay. Thank you. I don't want to be scared.
All right.
Okay, so, I think a lot of us are looking back at the start of COVID and how it was just a handful of cases for a while back then, too. What do we know about monkeypox and how it's spreading in Nashville or anywhere for that matter?
Well, the good thing about monkeypox is we do know quite a bit about how it spreads, and that is primarily through contact, specifically contact with a monkeypox rash on someone else. So, monkeypox does have other symptoms, but the rash is the telltale sign. And these are usually blisters. They almost look like warts if you look at pictures of them. And they're actually peculiar. They change over time, often have pus in them. Sorry to maybe gross folks out. But anyway, you would likely not confuse these with bug bites or poison ivy, which we might get here in the summer. And this rash does last for quite some time. It can take a month to clear up. Often shows up first on the hands, then the mouth, also the genitals.
Okay, so officials say the outbreak appears mostly to affect men who have sex with other men. Is there some reason why they would be more at risk?
Well, not exactly, except that this is a virus that is passed through contact, like we're talking about. So the more contact, the more risk. The more sexual partners, the more risk. But this is most certainly not a disease for just gay men to worry about.
Okay, right. Because it's not only spread through sexual contact. I heard on Weekend Edition that there's a possibility of transmission if you're fully clothed on a dance floor. That sounds pretty transmissible. So, who should be concerned?
Well, I do hate to say it, but it's kind of the point you're making. All of us.
Mm-hmm. All right. It's a bad Michael Jackson reference that I'm totally not going to make about being on the dance floor.
Okay.
Now, you said you weren't here to scare us.
Yes.
And thank you for scaring me.
Well, I was actually doing quite well not scaring myself as well as I've been covering this the last few weeks. But then I did call Dr. Donald Alcindor at Meharry Medical College. He's a virologist and professor. The good news is monkeypox is more mild than its viral cousin, smallpox. Sometimes it is just a rash with no other symptoms, though fever and other flu-like symptoms are very common. And there is a vaccine for it. It's actually the same vaccine as the smallpox shot. But remember how monkeypox often appears on the hands at first, and it can take a month to fully clear up. And it's still contagious until that rash is basically totally gone, Dr. Alcindor said. So here's what he says. Listen, while it seems to mostly be moving person to person through intimate contact, it can also pass with a simple handshake. So, it's not airborne like COVID, but Alcindor is a bit concerned what happens in places with poor hand hygiene like schools. Here he is.
Let's say monkeypox get into the schools in Tennessee, and then the teachers, and then the people that work in the kitchen. And all I'm saying is that to put this infection in a population that is very mobile and able to transmit that infection on a wide scale, let me just say, it would affect children going back to school in a very serious way. You would then see a complete change in effort by the federal government for widespread vaccination in schools. You would see that happen overnight.
Yeah, his point is, if you think quarantine times for COVID were bad, monkeypox, I mean, it could be twice as long.
Blake, you said you weren't here to scare us. That's all tough to hear, but okay. There is a pretty effective vaccine, right?
There is.
All right, and Tennessee just got a few thousand doses, so who gets those? Will kids get the ones heading back to school in a few weeks? Will they be the first ones to get it?
Well, that is certainly not the plan at all at the moment. There's just not enough to go around. Most of what's being used across the country, even in cities that have much larger outbreaks than here, it's coming from a national stockpile, and the manufacturers of it are making more, but it's going to be next year before we're going to have doses in the millions available. Tennessee has received a few thousand doses to date, but right now, the only people who can get them are those who've been deemed close contacts of the few confirmed cases in Davidson County. Like you said, Davidson County, we're still in the single digits. Metro Public Health Department is actually going to be putting out new numbers every Thursday. And just this week, Memphis found its first case.
So before you go, can I ask a simple question?
Yes.
Why is it called monkeypox?
All right. It may actually not be called monkeypox for long. So mostly people who've gotten this virus up to now have contracted it from exotic animals, hence the name. The first known cases were actually from a colony of monkeys. But the virus has been with us for 60-something years, but has mostly been a disease dealt with on the African continent. What's new this year is it's been spreading in Europe and here in the U.S., but the World Health Organization is going to rename it since the name monkey has been used in very racist ways related to Africa. So this is certainly not an African virus. The monkeys who had it in the first cases, they were in Copenhagen. So it's just only been African nations dealing with it for the most part since then, and there's been scant attention from it, from the U.S. To this virus until now. But whatever it's called, we all may get to know this virus a little bit better before it goes away.
Okay, speaking of that, any advice for folks who want to, what can folks do to protect themselves?
All right, listen,
and others?
All I know is what we hear from the CDC, but here's what they say. Wash your hands.
Okay.
You see this little guy, hand sanitizer?
Yeah.
It's still going to help with this, too. In fact, it may be more helpful than with COVID. And then, of course, touching people with monkeypox. And that's a difficult, delicate situation. But be careful with your close contact and handling, let's say, bed linens of someone who has had monkeypox.
So in a sense, COVID has prepared us for this.
In some sense.
That is WPLN's senior healthcare reporter, Blake Farmer. Blakes, thank you always for your reporting.
You're welcome.
We have to take a short break. When we come back, go with us on a hunt for an elusive and valuable plant growing wild in Middle Tennessee. Have you made the move to planting native species in your garden? Have you noticed invasive species crowding other plants out in our parks? Tweet us about it at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil A. Colonna, and this is Nashville. A few times a month, we're going to take you out into the city with us to show you an ordinary street corner, a vacant grocery store, an inconspicuous bush in the woods. Now, I know what you're thinking. That doesn't sound very exciting. Our goal is to peel back the layers on an overlooked parts of the city and region, past and present. Today, we're dropping a pin, but we can't tell you where exactly. It's public land in the Rutherford County, and we're keeping the exact location a secret because it involves an endangered plant. Our producer, Steve Harouche, took a hike with MTSU plant scientist Ethan Swigert in search of wild ginseng.
There's kind of a legend about ginseng that it shows itself to you, and if you're not ready, you won't find it. And so we had known about this patch, and we went and found it. And then one of our colleagues wanted to see it, and he spent about 3 hours, got lost back in here, and never found it. So the joke was like, well, you weren't ready.
For what it's worth, I feel ready. As we get deeper into the woods, Ethan points out the trees along the way, mostly pine and other evergreens. The ground is rocky, so Ethan says we're not likely to find ginseng here. But then something catches his eye, and it definitely looks like ginseng, at least to me. False alarm.
Now, this is Virginia creeper here. It's a native vine, and people always will say, oh man, I've got like 5 acres of ginseng. And I'm like, no, you don't. 5 acres of ginseng, you're sitting on like $1 million. No way.
Virginia creeper is not worth anything. But if you've got wild ginseng on your property, now that's a different story.
Yeah, watch your ankles.
There are boulders everywhere. But soon the landscape begins to change. Less rocky, more maple trees. Signs that we're getting closer.
And we're looking for a northeast facing hillside. The way to find that is wake up in the morning and maybe around 9:30 or 10, look at where the sun hits, and that's a good spot to go and find ginseng. You want kind of a gently sloping, which as you can see is what we got here, and that'll help with drainage. They like to be well watered, but not soggy and not too dry. They're pretty persnickety, really. I like it just right.
By now, we've been out for an hour, which is about twice as long as Ethan thought it might take. And even though it's hot and muggy, honestly, the hike is pretty enjoyable.
Watch that. Yeah, talking to those old ginsengers or sangers, going out singing, a lot of what they talk about is just the moments of spending time with like their grandfather or dad or whatever, and hiking in the woods, crawling under brush and stuff, just having fun.
But we came here to find ginseng, and it is not going well.
Man, I just feel like it's right here and I'm not seeing it.
This goes on for a while.
Let me check my GPS. Kind of in these little pockets like this, it's good to kind of slow down a little bit and look for it. Nope, close. But that kind of shape is what you're looking for. So much Virginia creeper, it gets my hopes up. I think it is left here. Or actually, maybe right. Alright, let's keep going that way. If I remember right, this patch will be on this side. Nope, tricked me.
But all this time on the trail is giving Ethan plenty of time to school me on ginseng. It's been cultivated for thousands of years for its medicinal benefits. Native Americans used the root to treat everything from headaches to infertility. High blood pressure? Take wild ginseng. Low blood pressure? Take wild ginseng. It's sometimes called a miracle plant, and that's because really it can be whatever you need it to be.
Almost like a cigarette. You might smoke it if you need it to get amped up. You might smoke it if you need to calm down, kind of get the same effect.
Right.
Or a different effect depending on what you want. Ginseng's kind of like that.
It's easy to see why it's so valuable. Ethan says the gnarlier the root, the better. Though it's nearly impossible to know how gnarly the root is from above ground. And in case you haven't put this together yet, it's nearly impossible to see, period. Even if you know what you're looking for. Which, thankfully, Ethan does.
There, God, right there. There it is. Look at that. We walked past it twice. That's it. That's ginseng. That's 4-prong. That's a huge one. Good grief. Walked right past it. Ha! Told you, right? Like if it doesn't want to be seen, it won't. We slowed down. We chilled out, and then boom, there it is. I almost stepped on it. But so you can see these are the prongs. And this whole thing is the leaf, and that's a leaflet. And then there it's flowering. Man, I was getting worried. I was like, If I don't show him this dang plant, he's gonna think I'm a joke.
The ginseng is no joke. It's a beautiful plant, and it was hiding in plain sight. It's also an endangered plant. So after all this, we leave it right where we found it and head back.
Hiding in plain sight. I love it. Now, I do want to mention that ginseng is highly regulated in Tennessee, and we have a link to more information on the post for this episode at thisisnashville.org. My next guests have been working to help us all better understand the natural beauty that surrounds us. Kim Bailey is the former staff naturalist at Warner Parks, and Isaac Santos is a program coordinator at Shelby Park. Kim, Isaac, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Khalil.
Thank you. Hello.
So, Kim, let me start with you. As we just heard, there are amazing plants all around us that we might not notice. What are we missing sometimes when we look at a forest and just see a bunch of green?
Well, I think people don't understand that we live in a wonderland here in Tennessee, that there is incredible biodiversity across the state. We have actually 7 ecoregions from the plains to the eastern mountains, and each have their own unique plant community. And Davidson County alone has 1,276 native vascular plants species. That makes our county 4th in the state for plant diversity.
Now, that's wonderful. Now, did your work at Warner Parks, did that affect how you thought about plants?
Absolutely. I did a lot of public programming, and while answering questions, interconnections between native plants and other living organisms inevitably came up. And in addition, the sheer amount of time I spent in nature was like a master class in why native plants are important. For example, when a hackberry butterfly lands on your sweaty arm to feed off your sweat, you realize that their young are dependent on hackberry trees, which are considered a weed tree here in Nashville. They also feed migratory birds and resident birds when the berries are ripe. And goldenrod flowers in the fall are covered in soldier beetles, which shows you that pollen and nectar from native wildflowers are essential to the insect's lives. And then, of course, birds feasting on berries are an obvious example of this recurring theme of the ecology of our ecosystem and how important native plants are to that.
Now, Isaac, you work at Shelby Park doing forest restoration. What does a healthy forest look like as opposed to one that needs restoring?
Yeah, so there are a lot of great examples of healthy forest here in Middle Tennessee and a lot of great examples of not so healthy forests. So if you walk around an area, actually a lot of areas in Warner Parks where they started to do some restoration, and also at Radnor Lake State Park, you can walk around this forest. It's open, it's spacious. There's a beautiful, mature canopy of hardwood trees. And then down below in the understory, there might be some bushes here and there. There might be some shrubs. But for the most part, it's relatively open, spacious forest you can see for a while.
Mm-hmm. That's just quite peaceful, I imagine.
It is, yeah.
So we did a whole episode on invasive species. If you want to go back and listen, at thisisnashville.org. Now, people have to contend with weeds when working in their yards, and the same is true for parks. Mm-hmm. Now, Kim, what does an invasive species pull look like at a public park? I can't imagine that that's an easy task.
Well, luckily, when you go to Warner Park, and I'm sure Shelby and other parks too, they provide you with tools and instructions. And a large group will show up, and you'll clear an area and make a huge difference. As Isaac said, you want to have a clear forest, not this undergrowth, outcompeting all of the native species.
Now, Isaac, you've been organizing these at Shelby Park, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
How much progress have you made?
So far, we started the program end of 2022 or end of 2021, starting into 2022. And so far, we have cleared about 4 acres of forest from invasive species.
How many people are involved in this effort?
We've had more than 300 volunteers serve at this point. And a lot of these volunteers are actually... we just had another massive corporate event that brought that number probably closer to 400 folks who have come out to the park this winter and spring into the summer to pull invasive species and to plant native trees in their place.
Why the season of winter, spring?
Yeah, there are a couple reasons for that. One is it's not so fun to be out pulling a bunch of plants in the heat of the day in the middle of the summer. And also you have things like poison ivy. The other thing that's really helpful, invasive species make themselves very easy to find in late fall, early spring. One of the reasons they have an advantage is they have a longer photosynthetic period, so they keep their leaves longer and then get them earlier than a lot of native plants. And that's an advantage for us in the winter, because the last thing we want is volunteers pulling native species. So it makes it really easy to say, well, here are the identifying features, but if it has leaves, it's most likely an invasive plant.
Okay, so when we look deeper into green spaces available, what will we find?
Could you clarify?
The green spaces available here in our region, looking at parks, looking at green spaces and greenways, what will we find if we look deeper into them?
Well, it depends on the green space you're in. I mean, if you're in an area like Shelby, I think the more time you spend there, the more you're going to realize, as Kim was saying, there's such a complex mosaic of biodiversity. I think the longer you spend there, the longer you realize there's so much biodiversity and there's so many relationships. And when you actually get to step into that space and feel like you're part of that, I think not only do wild areas, do green spaces provide all sorts of services for us, whether that be trees moderating temperatures or making sound quieter, but also it's such an area, as you mentioned, it's peaceful. It provides so much peace. And so all the green spaces around here provide such an opportunity for folks here to get out into the forest, to experience all the relationships, all the biodiversity that these places have to offer.
So it's not about hitting up these parks and green spaces just for a hike and to get some exercise. You're promoting, you really get yourself in touch with what's happening there.
Yeah. And I think green spaces, they offer so many different opportunities, from recreation to hiking. But I think if you would like, there is an opportunity to step deeper into those spaces to learn about local ecology. And I think whenever you learn about local ecology, local species, it makes a place really come alive. And I think that's the beauty of having green spaces so close in so many areas in Nashville.
If someone wants to help with your forest restoration project, what should they do?
Yeah, I think step one is go on friendsofshelby.org/volunteer and sign up for our newsletter. As we mentioned, we don't do a ton of invasive removal in the summer due to varying conditions, but as soon as efforts start to ramp up, we'll be sending that out in our newsletter and getting folks involved.
All right. If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm Khalil A. Colonna. We're talking this hour about plant conservation with Kim Bailey and Isaac Santos. Do you want to help identifying a plant naturally growing in your backyard or neighborhood? Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Now, Kim, I want to know, this might sound like a very, very obvious question, but why is biodiversity important?
Oh, biodiversity supplies so many of our resources. I mean, it provides water quality, air quality, pollination services. The more the biodiversity you have, the more resilient your habitat is, or ecosystem. If you think about it, if there is a traumatic weather event or something else that happens, climate change, for example, if you just have 3 species in a habitat, they might all fail. But if you have 52 species, some of them are going to be able to adapt and be resilient and stay healthy. So the more biodiversity, the healthier an ecosystem is.
What about the plants that are the foundation to the local ecosystem? Like, what are the so-called keystone plants?
Well, this brings up my favorite author, Doug Tallamy. He's actually a professor at the University of Delaware doing intensive research on insect and native plant communities and their interactions. And he is the one that has identified that goldenrod and coneflowers and other asters are some keystone plants, which means that many, many species of bees, butterflies, beetles can feed on them. But then there's specialist bees that require a specific host plant, just like many butterflies require a host plant. So there's a lot of diversity, and it's really helpful to have a garden that feeds the generalist as well as the specialist bees.
What are some of your favorites?
Oh, I love bee balm and goldenrod. The coral honeysuckle is beautiful, and I've seen my hummingbirds come to that as well as some other insects. Lots of asters, and the salvia will bring a lot of different species. I've seen bees, bugs, beetles, butterflies, wasps. So it's just great joy to go out into my garden and see all of these different insects that are actually getting sustenance and providing these ecosystem services we were talking about.
Again, we will have a link to more information about keystone plants on this episode post at thisisnashville.org. Isaac, do you have any favorite plants or trees?
Oh, I do. Yeah, the area where we are working is called Beech Grove Hill. And beech trees, I'm originally from the Seattle area, so I hadn't seen as many. And I came out here, and there's this area called Beech Grove Hill. And there was this tree that was deep in the thicket, surrounded by invasives, and it was really hard to see. And we started removing invasives and came upon this massive American beech tree that just has this it was a huge tree. It has thick gray bark, almost looks like elephant skin. And it's this massive tree that just creates a huge canopy. And I think since moving here, that's quickly become one of my favorites.
Now, what do you think people misunderstand about forest restoration?
That's a great question. Well, I think one of the things people misunderstand is they hear forest restoration and they think, oh, this is something scientists do. This is not something I can do, which there is so much important work that goes on in the scientific community. But when we're talking about invasive species, these species that come into ecosystems that drastically reduce biodiversity, and Kim talked about all the reasons that's important, there is a simple solution, and it's something that can involve community members. Community members can come out and they can take an active role in forest restoration. And I think that's something that people don't understand, is that it's something, right now at Friends of Shelby Park, we have volunteer events, and it's something you can come, you can get involved with, and you can see the quick, tangible impacts of a large community mobilizing around forest restoration.
Mm-hmm. Kim, how about you? What do you think are some of the obstacles to plant conservation?
Well, really, I think lack of education is the biggest obstacle, because if you ask most Nashvillians, they don't really understand that if you go to a nursery, that anything they offer isn't good for your yard. And one thing I would ask listeners to do is first educate yourself and then go to your landscaper and to your nurseries and say, we only want natives, and this is why it's so important. And stop tropical plants that require more water and more pesticides and fertilizers when our native plants don't need all those things. So it actually helps save resources and save you money if you plant natives, as well as providing essential food and habitat and space for insects and other wildlife. So, yeah, there's a lot you can do to educate yourself. That's one of the big obstacles. And then I would say invasives we've already covered. There are huge obstacles to biodiversity. Climate change is going to be affecting our biodiversity because some of the plants that have traditionally lived here are not going to do as well as we warm as a city. And so we'll have to navigate that issue.
You know, it's a lot more than just planting trees, I imagine. So what are other things that we can do to help support our local ecosystem?
Well, one thing you can do is read Doug Talmey's book or join his Instagram page. You can join the local chapter of Wild Ones. It's an organization that promotes native plant restoration, and they have a Facebook page that will answer your questions, and they provide seminars and field trips. I would also volunteer. There's a group called the Habitat Connection, whose main mission is to educate HOAs about native plants, because so often contractors will go in and clear a lot, build a big, massive building, and then plant just a few trees, often not native. And, of course, we know that to have a truly native yard, you need layers. You need the low-growing wildflowers, and then the taller perennials, and then shrubs, and then trees, and all creating a service for the different wildlife that live there. So you can help with that. There's also Green Hills Park is being developed as a demonstration native plant garden, and I know they could use your help. And then Laughlin Springs Park just got this huge new property that's beautiful, but it has euonymus vine covering most of the trees. And what happens is it eventually grows up the trees and kills the tree. And so they need people there to pull out the exotics. So lots you can do.
Isaac, for someone who is ready to take the step and to think much more deeply about picking native plants, your advice, where should they start?
Well, I believe actually, Kim, I believe that Charlotte Warner Parks have a resource that has a list. I mean, there are a lot of local organizations. You can find a list of native plant species, and I think a great place to start is if you have the luxury of having a yard, start in your yard. So many folks who have come out to events, after the event, they're like, oh my gosh, I have so much privet and honeysuckle in my yard, and they had no idea. So I think obviously you start with the education part of it, but once you become educated on what an invasive is, what a native is, there are resources out there to find lists of native plant species so that you can bring those into your yard. I mean, habitat fragmentation and the takeover invasives are inimical to biodiversity, but if you can bring a piece of habitat into your backyard and a space for native species to come and find the resources they need, I think that's a wonderful first step.
Isaac Santos is a program coordinator at Shelby Park, and Kim Bailey is the former staff naturalist at Warner Parks. Thanks to you both for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Khalil.
We have to take a short break. If native species are so important, what can be done? Just not to save them, but to help them flourish. Do you have plants or native plant species in your yard or garden? Tell us about it. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. In the natural world, everything is connected. Tennessee's state butterfly, the zebra swallowtail, needs a native tree called the pawpaw. It's what they eat. It's where they lay their eggs. No pawpaws, no zebra swallowtails. And look, pawpaws aren't endangered, but when was the last time you saw one in someone's backyard? And I've never seen one. And what about native species that are seriously dwindling? Who's looking out for them? What do we lose when a Tennessee plant goes extinct? And what exactly can we do before it's too late? To learn more, I'd like to introduce my next guests. Roger McCoy is Director of Conservation at the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, and Cooper Breeden is Coordinator for the Tennessee Plant Conservation Alliance. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Roger, this is a passion for you, right?
Absolutely.
How'd you get into plant conservation?
Well, fortunately, I fell into botany in college and then went on to school and landed a job here in Tennessee over 20 years ago. Worked a little bit for the U.S. Forest Service before that, but have learned a lot since I've been here in Tennessee.
Okay, so what is your area of focus at the State Department?
So in the Division of Natural Areas, we have two main areas. One is tracking rare species statewide, and we keep up and establish the official state's rare plant list. And then we also identify sites for protection and inclusion in the State Natural Areas program under the State Natural Areas Preservation Act.
So tracking rare species, how many do we have in Tennessee?
So we have about over 500 vascular plants that are listed as rare. Not all of those are endangered. Endangered is a legal status. So we have some endangered, some threatened, some special concern, and then we have a number of federally listed species as well, primarily because of our geography that Kim talked about. We have some endemic species that occur nowhere else in the world but Tennessee.
What percentage of the list are endangered or threatened?
I don't know for sure. My guess is probably about 15 to 20% of them are state endangered and then threatened and special concern.
Now, this may be a wild question you may not know. Is that a good comparative average compared to other states that you may know of?
We probably have more listed species in Tennessee, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing a poorer job. We have greater biodiversity, and we have a greater number of endemic species compared to maybe other states that have less biodiversity. So just the nature of our latitude, the geography from east and west, the different physiographic provinces, there are a number of species that naturally occur nowhere else in the world and therefore warrant protection under the rare plant list.
Okay, so where can the amateur botanist go for more information?
So you can go to our website and read about the 84 state natural areas and learn what occurs there. And most of these have some sort of infrastructure to go and visit. Additionally, the University of Tennessee Herbarium has a website where you can see the number of pictures of virtually every single known plant from Tennessee and a map of their range. And then there's other resources. A lot of folks use iNaturalist, which is a great resource for identifying and see what other people have identified in your area.
So a lot of news we get can be doom and gloom, but do you have a happy story? Like, what is a success story of a species that you all have been able to save or resurrect?
So, great question. Just last year, a plant called Cumberland sandwort was delisted from the federal list. And the reason that was primarily work of the Division of Natural Areas within our department, as well as state parks and the Big South Fork National Recreation Area. And this is a species that its global range is limited to just a few counties in the world. But we've been able to protect sites through the State Natural Areas Program and state parks, as well as mitigate impacts from recreation. And so we had a celebration for that in April of this year, celebrating the success of that species coming off the endangered species list.
Well, congratulations, or should I say congratulations to us all?
To all of us.
Yes. Now, Cooper, how about you? I mean, what's a win for the TPCA that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I think one great example. So the TPCA, the Tennessee Plant Conservation Alliance, the whole purpose of it is it's a loose network of organizations and agencies and individuals interested in rare plant conservation. And really the whole goal of it is to increase our capacity to do more for rare plants in the state. One great project that has been going on for a couple years now is run by a volunteer. Her name is Margie Hunter. She's been working on a species called running glade clover, which is here in Middle Tennessee, in our cedar glades that are in this area, and it's kind of endemic here, and it's only known from a few populations. But she's taken it upon herself to get in touch with some of the private property landowners where this naturally occurs, propagate the species, and introduce it into public protected lands. And she's been monitoring it herself for years. She's had help from a number of other volunteers and from biologists at Division of Natural Areas, but it's been a highly successful project, and I think it's provides a good base to build upon for a model for future projects.
A volunteer happy story. And that kind of leads me to my next question, that, you're working to collaborate and to create this collaboration in conservation efforts. Tell me, who have you been bringing together?
Yeah, it's been a lot of people. There are probably about 20 organizations or agencies now that are involved in rare plant conservation in one way or another. But really the goal is to bring more partners on board so that we can do more and address a lot of these concerns. And so one of the ways that I've been trying to bring more partners on board is we have a number of institutions across the state, organizations that do horticulture, so like Cheekwood or Memphis Botanic Garden or Knoxville Botanic Garden, Reflection Writing, Arboretum in Chattanooga. They're all organizations that have a lot of horticultural expertise, but have not traditionally been involved in local rare plant conservation projects. And so I've been working to bring them on board, tried to explore whether or not there is an interest at those organizations to figure out if they could play a hand in some of these rare plant conservation projects.
Now, how's it been going?
It's been good. It's been, it's been slow going to work it out amongst everything else, but I've been working on that for about a year, and depending on the organization, it's at different stages. But at this point, all of those organizations have received at least a small collection of rare plant seeds that they are currently growing out, and they're in different stages of that process. And for some of them, we have plans to build on that and try to get them some more material that they can grow out, and eventually that will be used for restoration in the wild.
So how will these collaborations kind of work to provide overall health and boost of health for our native plants?
So specifically for a lot of these rare species, I mean, a lot of them occur on the lands that Roger and his division manage, but there's a lot that occur on private lands or on other vulnerable lands where they don't have protection. And so ultimately the goal would be to preserve the genetic integrity of those populations by collecting seed and storing them in a seed bank, or then propagating those out and introducing them into a protected area so that we have those populations, they're not in a highly vulnerable area, and they can be preserved in somewhere like a state natural area or a state park.
Then talking about areas and locations, Roger, you track the locations of these rare species as well. What happens when you find out about a rare plant, but it's on private land?
So we still map that record in our database. We have a team of biologists who do that. And then those data can get used in a couple different ways. One is through avoidance. So maybe there's a public works project, and we might comment on potential impacts and maybe adjust the road or the power line or whatever that may be. And then when there's a concentration of rare species, we might work with the landowner. And if we have a willing landowner, the state, our department has an active land acquisition program where we can purchase land, add that to the system of state parks or state natural areas.
Are there any new land acquisitions to talk about?
Well, sure. It's an active thing. In fact, just yesterday, a colleague of mine presented on an potential addition to Carter Cave State Natural Area down in Franklin County. So this is just north of the Alabama state line. And this is a site that has a number of rare plants, including a federally listed plant, Moorfield's leather flower, as well as some other rare plants to that region of the Cumberland Plateau.
The leather flower, what's special about that? I love the name.
So it's the genus Clematis, and your gardeners will be familiar with that. And specifically, this one was first described, I think, back in the 1980s from North Alabama. It was found by an amateur botanist, and then Dr. Robert Krall of Vanderbilt University described it new to science. Fast forward about 20 or 30 years, and some botanists who Cooper and I know found it in the state of Tennessee. And then because it's federally listed, our division can get funds from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we have botanists who go out and look for new populations, manage populations when needed.
Now, Cooper, you mentioned rare plant seeds. Is that something that folks can do in their backyards if they have them?
It is something that there are ways to get rare plant seeds. Some of the native plant nurseries sell rare plant species. But it's not something that's really encouraged as a restoration effort, just because most people that when they're planting species in their backyard, it's not necessarily in large populations, and so it's not going to be a sustainable population that will allow that species to persist. But it is another way to just incorporate native plants into your yard, and like Isaac and Kim were talking about in that last segment, that fostering that connection and fosters a better understanding of the ecosystem and the interaction between those plants and the butterflies or bees or birds that depend on it.
I do not have a green thumb, so if I planted a native species in my backyard and killed it, I would feel incredibly guilty. If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekulona. We've been talking this hour about conserving our native plants. Now, Roger, what's the difference between a natural area and a state park?
Good question. So we're part of the State Parks Bureau, and some of our state natural areas are managed by state parks. Your listeners in the Nashville area would best know Radnor Lake, which is a state natural area. It was one of the first designated in 1973. The purpose of the Natural Areas Act in those lands primarily is preservation. Recreation is secondary. So we also have natural areas on other agency lands. Here in Nashville, we have portions of Warner Park that are designated as a state natural area, at Beeman Park as well. And so our focus in natural areas is habitat and species conservation. Recreation is encouraged, but it's secondary. So you're not going to find the development you might find at some state parks, the inns, or other facilities like that. But again, a lot of our natural areas are also state parks. Frozen Head is another good example of that one.
Now, why is that distinction important?
Well, it's important. When the Natural Areas Act was signed by Governor Dunn in 71, it was really to make sure that we are preserving elements of our natural heritage across Tennessee. And again, recreation, we want to encourage that. But really, it is about the conservation of those rare communities and the species that thrive in them.
Okay, now we just got a tweet from Endangered Spirit, and they sent us a photo of one of our many pawpaw trees. They were taken back in April when it was in flower. Thank you very much. You are the best, Endangered Spirit. Now, Roger, your staff offers hikes through state parks, and you suggest taking a hike with a botanist. We'll have a link to more info on our show post at thisisnashville.org. But tell me, how is the experience of taking a hike with a botanist different?
Well, my wife would tell you that it's a very slow walk for starters, and we're often looking at the ground, which is true. So it's not, I mean, yeah, there's a nice, exercise component to it, but to go out with an expert who knows those species, who can tell you about them, put a name to it, first of all, tell you a little bit about its habitat, and then just to share that with other people. I mean, when you're on those hikes and those outings that we offer through the Division of Natural Areas, you're with a group of people who are just genuinely enthusiastic about what they're seeing. And it's just a different experience. It's a slower experience. So think less about a jog on a greenway and more about really just taking in what's there to see and things that you might walk right past without someone pointing it out.
Talking about people's enthusiasm. Now, Cooper, you work and you build these coalitions of people who work together on conservation. What's your advice to people listening to us right now who may be enthusiastic and excited? How should they get started?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a first step is similar to what we've talked about before, is just reconnecting with nature. I think we've kind of lost that connection as a society with nature, and we don't fully understand what's around us and the cool things that are around us. A lot of people don't know about, for instance, the cedar glades in Middle Tennessee, which have a lot of unique species that are found nowhere else. And so I think getting out there more and connecting with nature, either by doing hikes like this or even by starting your own gardens, as Isaac was saying, start creating your own habitat in your yard, it refosters kind of that connection with nature. That is one way, but there's ways to volunteer as individuals and get involved in some of these projects. So whether it's through the Tennessee Plant Conservation Alliance, and I actually work for the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative based out of Boston P, and one of my roles is to coordinate the TPCA, but we have volunteer opportunities through that at different areas across the state, and I know a lot of other organizations have those opportunities as well.
Do you get to hike much to check out plant life?
I do, yeah. I get out quite a bit and see some unique areas, both in public natural areas as well as some private areas, and there's actually a lot in some of the, like our public rights of ways on roadsides and power line rights of ways that are they're small, but they're really cool areas to see.
So say I'm going to take the leap. I'm going to get some seeds. I'm going to plant some things in my backyard. What should I plant?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I think that kind of depends on your yard, and you got to know a little bit about the ecology of your yard. Is it dry? Is it wet? Is it sunny? Is it shady?
It's very sunny and often filled with cats.
Gotcha. That's a good question. I mean, I think there are a couple really common grasses that are kind of ornamental but native here. Things like little bluestem, or there's several different kinds of bluestem. But then you can intersperse it with some of the things that have been mentioned before, like coneflowers or black-eyed Susans or phlox, and can't remember some of the other things Isaac mentioned. But we have a huge diversity of species here, and a lot of them are available at some of our native plant nurseries that are around the area. Awesome. We have a couple, yeah.
Okay. Now, Roger, we heard earlier in the show about wild ginseng, which is now fairly rare. What can we do to help people access the benefits they find from some of the plants without putting themselves in danger?
Well, ginseng, the big thing is not to dig it, to help protect it. It is regulated, and there is a legal export out of the state that's regulated by our division. The big thing is just enjoy the plants, particularly when you're on public land. Look at them, enjoy them, don't pick them. And if you do, want to pick some berries or something like that, if you're at Shelby Bottoms, there's nice blackberry patches there. That's okay. But, when it comes to digging up plants, also just in terms of recreation, stay on the trail. Those trails were designed by someone who had the resource in mind. Maybe that's even a cultural resource, to prevent erosion and avoid trampling native species.
Now, I'd like to hear from both of you on this. We've got just under 2 minutes left. What do you think poses the bigger threat to our native species, climate change or development? Cooper.
That's a tough question. I think maybe in the long term, climate change might be the answer, but that we'll wait and see how that turns out. But I think, one of the things that I hear about on a very regular basis is different populations being destroyed because we don't really have very good protection for rare plants that aren't on public properties. And so, it's very frequently that I hear about a plant being destroyed because of development, because of a new gas station or something going in, or because of how it's managed on a roadside. And so that's happened on a very regular basis. And so I think in the short term, I think development and other threats like that are a bigger concern.
You went out and tried to save some plants recently, right?
I did. There was a federally listed species that only occurs in one county. It's called Spring Creek bladderpod, only known from Wilson County, Tennessee, only known from a couple populations. It was on a private site that all of us have known about for years, and I've had my eye on it to do some seed collection just to preserve it because I knew the area was rapidly developing. And I was talking to some people about it, and they're like, well, it's actually being developed and may have already been developed. And so it was news to me. And so I went out there a couple hours before I was set to fly out of the state and go on a trip and tried to do a rescue mission. And I was out there combing through the grass looking for the plants while as I would move over, the bulldozer would come and bulldoze an area.
Wow. That's like a danger mission right there.
Yeah. I actually showed up 7 minutes before they were going to blast at the site.
Wow. Wow. The exciting life. I want to thank you so much for all the work that you're both doing. That is Cooper Breeden, coordinator of the Tennessee Plant Conservation Alliance. He was joined by Roger McCoy with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. Thanks again for being with us.
Thank you.
We want to thank everyone who tuned in this hour. Tomorrow, over the past few years, a handful of landmark restaurants have been closing. What do we stand to lose when our staple spots close for good? And what can restaurateurs do to survive? This is Nashville is a production of WPLN News and Nashville Public Radio. Listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Our producers are Steve Harouche, Rose Gilbert, Tasha A.F. Limley. Our digital lead is Anna Gallegos-Cannon. Michaela Elias is our technical director. Our executive producer is Andrea Tudhope. Shout out to our intern, Doreen Chernecki. The masterminds behind our theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. Special thanks to Miss Margaret Rankle and Margie Hunter. The conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Facebook and Instagram, and tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Lake Alona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And be good to each other.